with your lovers.
From the decadent life of one shockingly glamorous duchess.
It certainly wasn't a traditional lesbian relationship by any sense.
To the tumultuous love story of JFK's favourite sister.
It would have been a stain on both the Devonshires and also the Kennedys.
These are the secrets of Chatsworth.
Explore new worlds and new ideas through programs like this. Made available for everyone through contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Chatsworth is home to Peregrine Cavendish, the 12th Duke of Devonshire. His family have owned it for almost 500 years. Today, there are just 11 dukes in England, out of a nation of 53 million. And houses like Chatsworth reflect their social standing.
It's very much home, and it's something which is much more of a home than perhaps it looks like from the outside. I think it helps that I'm used to it. It's not nearly as intimidating when you live there as it might look from the outside. Just the luckiest people in the world to be able to look out of our sitting room and see that beautiful view every day, different weathers, different lights. We're very lucky.
Chatsworth is just one of 4 great houses owned by the Duke of Devonshire, but it's certainly the most palatial. With a roof the size of a football field, more than half a mile of passageways, 300 rooms, 17 staircases and 350 doors, Chatsworth is one of England's largest private houses. The Duke of Devonshire enjoys the highest title of the English aristocracy, the hierarchy of noblemen who once ruled the country. Like all aristocrats, for the men of Chatsworth, their power base lay in land.
Land is very important because through land you obviously can create money, both through rents to farmers but also from produce. Having large holdings of land is what supported these great houses.
For 1,000 years, the kings and queens of England have rewarded faithful subjects with titles and land. And by the 1500s, the aristocratic Cavendish family had established themselves at Chatsworth. Back then, they were merely the Earls of Devonshire. 3 generations later, their title was upgraded to Duke, in thanks for Cavendish support of King William III in 1694.
It was an expression, really, of your position to be raised from an earldom to a dukedom. Being a duke means you have a higher position within the aristocracy and are closer to the monarchy.
People sometimes, when they introduced or they know they're going to meet somebody who's got a title, aren't quite sure what to expect, and then of course they're bound to be disappointed because we're just perfectly normal like they are.
But back in the 17th century, at Chatsworth, the Dukes of Devonshire were part of a power elite, exercising real control over people's lives. To maintain power, they had to keep hold of their wealth through centuries of turmoil. That's what the Duke's family have done for 16 generations, thanks to a medieval tradition that the English aristocracy still use to this day. It's known as primogeniture.
What particularly foreign visitors find hard to understand is primogeniture, in that almost everything, all the chattels and the assets of the family, go to the eldest son. And that has been the English way for many years. It's breaking down for obvious reasons now. It's deeply unfair, but it does mean that the large bulk of a collection will stay in one hand. So if the land is not divided, then there is enough land to generate income to keep the houses going.
As well as being the Duke's home, Chatsworth is also a tourist attraction. Nearly 750,000 people pass through the gates of this stately home every year to enter the Duke of Devonshire's extraordinary world. The modern-day opulence of Chatsworth is the synthesis of grand designs and conspicuous consumption, dating back to the 16th century.
Well, the first Duke built the main square of the house that you can see. You can sort of really see the palatial quality of the architecture, with the roof line decorated with all of the urns with gilded finials and so on.
Even the window frames are coated with thin sheets of gold.
It's an expression of wealth, but it also has very practical application because it doesn't need renewing as often as paint. It lasts about 30 years, whereas paint would only last sort of 4 or 5.
Inside, the first Duke built a series of opulent rooms, with ceilings painted by celebrated Italian artists. A bed that cost more than $100,000 in today's money. And a vast painted entrance hall. These rooms had one purpose: to showcase the grandeur of the new Duke of Devonshire. And the grounds of a great estate like Chatsworth are no less important. Here there are more than 1,600 species of tree, 70 sculptures, and a 900-foot-long pond built higher than the lawn behind it, so that the house appears to be floating on glassy water. Water has been used to impressive effect at Chatsworth since the 1600s. Today, head gardener Steve Porter keeps millions of gallons of water a year pumping over Chatsworth's historic water features.
The cascade was built by the first Duke, including the cascade house at the top with its 13 water spouts that can even put water up through the floor and create trickery, as well as putting water out of the roof and making a big splash. There's 24 different steps, and each step is a slightly different height or a different shape. So as the water goes off, each step makes a different sound. So as you walk up and down, you get like music almost from being played by the water.
It's what the garden is really best known as. It's a huge attraction for people, and people love to come and play in the cascade and paddle about. Experts who studied water say that just running water makes people happy.
Each year, Chatsworth's gardens attract 600,000 visitors who might rub shoulders with a duke.
It's wonderful that people want to come and visit. We really are pleased that they do, and we want to make sure that they want to come back again and again, so we arrange all sorts of new things all the time. And that's interesting and exciting to do that. Having people about the house, luckily it's big enough for us to live in a bit of it and the visitors to enjoy the rest of it. Also, we know full well that without the visitors, we wouldn't be here. They do pass a lot of very, very nice comments, which is great if you're wandering about and we happen to be recognized. And sometimes people say how much they've enjoyed it. And that's very gratifying.
Off limits to visitors, it's the archive below the house that guards the real secrets of Chatsworth, the dramas that have played out within these walls. Hundreds of letters by one duchess reveal her manipulation by a backstabbing best friend. her gambling addiction that threatened the survival of the estate, and the emotional pain that led her to write an impassioned message in her own blood. One portrait in the corridors of Chatsworth captures the glamour of this Duchess immortalized by the Hollywood movie. Her name was Georgiana.
Georgiana became an instant celebrity when she married the Duke of Devonshire. To give you an idea what that means, you have to compare it to Diana Spencer marrying Prince Charles or Kate Middleton marrying Prince William.
Georgiana came from the Spencer family, another powerful English dynasty. But this perfect match was no guarantee of marital harmony, as Georgiana discovered when she married William Cavendish, the 5th Duke of Devonshire, in 1774. For the 17-year-old bride, running a house like Chatsworth was a daunting prospect.
Her first summer at Chatsworth was a complete nightmare. She is handed the keys to the house by the housekeeper and is now expected to run this enormous estate. And she was terrified.
She was also expected to conceive a son and heir immediately.
She couldn't walk into a room without everyone staring at her stomach and waiting to see was she pregnant or not.
It took 8 years for Georgiana to conceive, and when she did, it was a girl.
This then enraged the Devonshire family, and they were very cross with her because what's the point of getting pregnant if you keep on having girls?
Georgiana was at breaking point, and she drowned her sorrows by gambling. Gambling was a popular pursuit of 18th century aristocrats. But Georgiana soon became addicted, and the stakes were ruinously high.
Georgiana could gamble $60,000 in one night. There was no family in the world who had that kind of money if you're doing it night after night. She was in such debt that she herself didn't know how much money she owed. And if you'd added them all together and the Duke had actually paid out, it would have liquidated the entire Devonshire estate and then some.
In the Chatsworth archive, Georgiana's letters reveal just how desperate she was.
So a lot of her letters are trying to get money off one person, writing other letters to somebody else, including the Prince of Wales, saying, you know, I will be paying you back. Please be assured, my dear friend, that you will be getting your money back. Later on is you have her letters when she's actually confessing to her debts and how she feels she can't tell her husband, and she must have felt unbelievably trapped.
Stuck in a suffocating marriage, and despite the attention of celebrity, Georgiana was lonely. So when she met Lady Elizabeth Foster in 1782, she thought she'd found a true friend.
Lady Elizabeth Foster, known universally as Bess, was the quintessential snake in the grass. People who watched her and knew her were convinced that she was a 100% fake.
From her gilded cage, the one person who didn't see it was Georgiana, desperate as she was for companionship.
There's always been a great deal of speculation about the nature of the relationship between Georgiana and Bess. How intimate was it really? It's entirely possible that they had some kind of sexual relationship with each other. It certainly wasn't a traditional lesbian relationship by any sense. They didn't want to run away together and just have it be the two of them.
The truth may never be known, but what the historical record does show is that Bess was a woman with an ulterior motive.
Anyone who knew Bess also knew that her real ambition was to drive out Georgiana, ensure her destruction, and get the Duke for herself.
Bess wheedled her way into the affections of first Georgiana and then the Duke. They began a ménage à trois that was to last for 15 years. She became the Duke's mistress, and was soon pregnant. In her heightened isolation, Georgiana's gambling soared out of control, and she took little comfort from the luxury surrounding her. Finally, after 15 years of marriage, at the age of 32, and to her enormous relief, Georgiana gave birth to a son. The birth brought fringe benefits.
Once she had produced an heir, like everyone else in the 18th century, it was sort of expected that she could now find love elsewhere. And she fell in a big way for a man much younger than her.
But the affair had disastrous consequences. Georgiana's letters show that she soon became pregnant, although many were later censored by family members to conceal the existence of the baby. When the Duke found out, he banished Georgiana abroad, forcing her to leave her beloved infant son, not knowing if she could ever return to Chatsworth. Far from home and about to give birth, Georgiana was so distraught she believed herself to be dying. Thinking she would never see her son again, she wrote him a dramatic letter, using her own blood for ink.
She writes to her longed-for son and heir, who she had had 2 years previously, and she's writing, "My dear little boy, as soon as you are old enough to understand this letter, it will be given to you. It contains the only present I can make you, my blessing written in blood." It's hard to imagine somebody getting to the point where they're actually writing in their own blood, but she is imagining at this point that she is going to die. She will not see her son again. And so she says, "May God Almighty bless and preserve you and make you good and happy. God bless you, my love. Your poor mother, Georgiana Devonshire."
Georgiana had the illegitimate baby, and eventually the Duke allowed her to return to Chatsworth, where she lived for another 14 years. Her friend Bess finally got what she wanted, when 3 years after Georgiana's death, she married the Duke and became the next Duchess at Chatsworth. Georgiana's longed-for son went on to inherit the Chatsworth estate. He was known as the Bachelor Duke. Perhaps due to his unhappy upbringing, he never married. He was the most eligible aristocrat in the country, and throughout his lifetime money flooded in, both from the lands of his estate and the expanding British Empire. When the 21-year-old Bachelor Duke inherited in 1811, the estate was 5 times larger than it is now, covering an area 1/5 the size of Rhode Island. He had wealth beyond measure. The Bachelor Duke especially loved the Chatsworth Gardens, and he found a fellow obsessive in gardener Joseph Paxton. Between them, they transformed Chatsworth. It cost a fortune. Over 5 years, they spent the equivalent of $4 million just on plant seeds. And by 1840, their annual expenditure on the garden was regularly reaching $7 million in today's money. The Bachelor Duke was obsessed with collecting, and in the early years of botanical discovery, there was plenty to keep him busy. In the glasshouses at Chatsworth, Paxton nurtured the earliest exotic plants for the Bachelor Duke, christening them with his master's family name, Cavendish.
Cavendish dwarf banana is still one of the best commercially grown bananas around the world. Produce something like 80% of the bananas that you'll buy and eat are Cavendish dwarf bananas.
It was the age of discovery, and the thirst for new species was insatiable.
Joseph Paxton and the 6th Duke managed to acquire a plant back in the 1840s, brought it to Chatsworth and put it into a pond, and it started to grow. It very quickly outgrew the pond, so Paxton built a bigger pond for it. And what he discovered was that it really needed moving water. And because he recreated the Amazon characteristics for it, it actually flourished and flowered. And there's a lovely illustration of him standing one of his daughters onto one of the leaves to illustrate the scale of the leaves, but also the strength that they took the girl's weight. So he was always pushing the boundaries and building something bigger to house his collection, or actually more innovative, using new materials or new design.
But no one had built a glass house big enough for the Chatsworth collection. So the bachelor Duke bankrolled Paxton on his most ambitious project to date.
This wall is actually the base wall of Paxton and the 6th Duke's great conservatory. It was the biggest and most innovative glasshouse in the world at its time when it was built in the 1840s. You could drive through in a carriage to actually look at the plants without having to get out and walk around. And the foliage would have touched the ceiling in places. It was exotic, huge, and had never been seen before.
It was the culmination of years of experiments. The bachelor Duke was delighted to be the owner of the world's biggest glasshouse. When the great conservatory was finished, people came from around the globe to marvel at a tropical scene with a glass sky. It took 300 tons of coal a year to heat the conservatory, but the unsightly fuel was never seen.
This is one of the tunnels that fed coal into the boilers for the great conservatory. There were small carts that were on tracks, and the coal was loaded by hand into those carts, came along the tunnel and then straight to the boilers, where it was fed into the boilers to heat the great glasshouse.
During World War I, there was not enough coal to heat the glasshouse, so it fell into disrepair and was eventually demolished. The great conservatory may be gone, but Paxton's next endeavour would add a dynamic dimension to Chatsworth's ornamental water world. In 1843, Paxton set out to build a new fountain for the bachelor Duke. Like the great conservatory, the Emperor Fountain was also a record breaker.
This was by and far the tallest fountain anybody had ever seen, and of course it was all done by gravity. It's very simple. We've got a 9-acre lake up at the top of the hill, 400 feet above us, and that head of water, under gravity, forces the water down through a 12-inch cast pipe, all the way down through the garden and out through an 1.5-inch nozzle, which pushes the force of the water up into the air. It was hundreds of men involved and horse and cart, and certainly the scale of works was probably bigger than anything else that had been seen before at Chatsworth, or probably in the country actually. It was one of the first big engineering feats of that time.
Between them, Paxton and the bachelor Duke pushed the boundaries of technology and left Chatsworth with a legacy of national importance. Meanwhile, the house had been expanding behind the scenes. Christine Robinson is Chatsworth's head housekeeper. The women of her family have worked here for 3 generations.
The corridors that I tread, I know they trod, and I think Chatsworth is, it is that sort of, it's a tactile place. You touch the walls and you really do feel that you're in touch with history.
Alongside 20 other women, Christine's grandmother and great-grandmother worked in Chatsworth's vast kitchen.
We're actually going through now into what's currently the joiner's shop, and it was the kitchen in the Victorian house, so we're really walking now through a fireplace into the kitchen. And there were originally 3 wonderful big fireplaces in here. My grandmother and my great-grandmother were too lowly to have been working anywhere else. You can imagine all the heat and steam that there was in a kitchen. Wherever possible in stately homes, they built kitchens with north-facing windows, so there was no direct sunlight coming in. So you would have needed a kitchen this size to provide the meals for perhaps 60 guests staying in the house, with an additional 100 maybe coming for a dinner at night. It's just staggering, really, the amount of work that must have gone on to be able to provide that.
The Chatsworth kitchen created elaborate and exotic dishes for the dukes to impress their guests. Turtle soup was one of the most expensive served at table. During the 19th century, turtle soup became a symbol of opulence. Sea turtles were most commonly used, but for the English aristocracy, it was the smaller green turtles from the Caribbean that were the greatest delicacy of all.
It would require 1 turtle per person, so you'd have 100 people perhaps at a dinner having turtle soup, 1 turtle per person, each turtle costing £20. And when you consider that a scullery maid's wage would be £20 for the whole year, it really does put it into context how lavish this entertainment was, and it's really quite staggering.
Scullery maids and kitchen maids, like the women in Christine's family, would have helped prepare all this food in an array of copper pans.
We had a wonderful discovery a few years ago when they were wanting to put a new sprinkler system into what's now the joiner's shop and was the old kitchen. So we had to force an entry into the cupboard, and there was box upon box of kitchen equipment.
The lost room contained more than 1,000 items of kitchenware that even the family didn't know existed.
Some of them have got the ducal coronet, or the crest, which is a snake. Some of them have got DD for Duke of Devonshire. Some of them have got C for Chatsworth.
It was women like Christine's grandmother who had to clean all these pans.
It would have been old-fashioned remedies with salt and vinegar to actually get the shine up, and then a thorough wash so that the salt didn't eat into the copper. The cleaning was done with soda as well, so it would have been really, really tough work.
And it's not the only thing the women had to clean.
There were 4 girls, probably between the age of 12 and 14, in a line across the corridor, and they scrubbed it on their hands and knees from one end to the other. And apparently the housekeeper said to her, "Annie, have you ever worked as hard in all your life?" And there she was at 12 years old, never really having worked before, but what an enormous task it must have seemed to a young girl like that.
70 servants lived at Chatsworth in the 19th century. They converged in one corridor.
And this would have been the main artery of the house. It still is. It's the way, if you want to catch anybody, this is where you wait, because they're bound to go by. But in the days we're thinking about, all the servants needing to get up into the house would have needed to go along this corridor.
But the world of the servant only went so far. All stately homes had a distinct divide between master upstairs and servant downstairs.
Well, you can't have upstairs without downstairs, because, you know, that's the engine room. That's where a lot of the work is done, which makes all the entertaining possible and makes everything work.
Today, Christine regularly crosses the line.
And this really is the main boundary between upstairs and downstairs. So from this staircase through into the vestibule, finally to arrive in the great dining room.
In the 19th century, the great dining room provided a backdrop for the best entertaining that Chatsworth had to offer. In 1892, an unusual duchess arrived at Chatsworth, who would use this room to maximum effect. Aged 60, Louise von Alten was not a typical Chatsworth bride. She'd been married to a duke before, so she became known as the Double Duchess. There hadn't been a duchess at Chatsworth for 100 years, when after a 30-year-long affair, Louise finally married the Duke of Devonshire to become the Double Duchess. The Double Duchess Louise was a queen of entertaining, and meeting her approval guaranteed entry into high society. she flung open the doors of Chatsworth's stately rooms and set about bringing them back to life. It was perfect timing, because this was the age of the house party. Historian Elizabeth Kehoe has come to Chatsworth to learn more about the infamous excesses of the Double Duchess's house parties.
The country house party is the absolutely perfect time for you to be able to meet with your lovers. And the way it works is that it's very, very important that you be friends with the hostess who does all of the logistical arrangements. This is when the rooms are allocated in a particular way. So the key thing is to make sure that you have easy access, or that your lover has easy access to you, and that he knows exactly where you are.
Chatsworth's 40 bedrooms were perfect for the Double Duchess's arrangements.
Each bedroom has a slot on the door which has the name of the person who is residing there. And what would happen at night after everyone had gone to bed is that's when the corridors would creak and there would be a little bit of rearranging that would take place. As long as it was discreet, it was completely acceptable.
When it came to love affairs, at a house like Chatsworth, there were certain rules and protocols that aristocratic women like the Double Duchess understood.
The Double Duchess had an affair with the Duke of Devonshire for 30 years. It was known by many people in society, it was not discussed, and her guard never slipped.
The Double Duchess was also close with Edward, Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII. And the Playboy Prince was a great fan of house parties, especially those at Chatsworth.
They would have come up these stairs, but they would have come through the...
Chatsworth curator Hannah Obi shows Elizabeth Kehoe the theatre of the house, where private performances were put on for the Double Duchess's distinguished guests.
Oh my. So here we are in the Duke and Duchess's theatre. Oh, this is...
The Prince of Wales was often seen in Chatsworth Theatre. And in the winter season, the Double Duchess welcomed him to Chatsworth shooting parties to take advantage of the estate's plentiful game.
So what we've got here is one of the game books for Chatsworth, and what I wanted to show you was this particular entry, which takes place with His Majesty King Edward VII, with the Duke of Devonshire and the other gentlemen of the house party. And it shows on that day they shot 256 pheasants, and then the next day they shot 859, and then you get this sort of running total at the bottom as well. So extraordinary numbers of games.
After the excesses of a day's shooting, lavish evening entertainments gave England's ruling class the opportunity to discuss politics in private.
And what we have here is a list from Chatsworth of the programme of music and the guests of the house party.
The other thing that strikes me as I look at this is that these are people who are in power. These are people who are actually running the nation. You've got the Prime Minister, you've got very senior government figures who are here.
In the 19th century, the dining rooms of houses like Chatsworth were where political clout was wielded. Here the Dukes of Devonshire liked to remind their guests of their wealth and social standing.
All of the knives and forks are lined up and very precisely measured, and the forks are actually turned upside down. And this is a hangover from an earlier tradition when people had lacy cuffs. You didn't want to trap the prongs of the fork in your cuff as your cuff might glance over it. The family crest is engraved on the back of the fork handle. On the table is a great display with silver reflecting the Devonshire family's history.
It's all carefully orchestrated to impress.
The whole point is the big table, right the way down the middle of the room, with the silver down the middle of the table, and it just looks fantastic. So when you walk in, people are, including me, absolutely awestruck.
With great candelabra, with sort of bacchanalian themes, all to do with wine and entertaining and feasting. And the very large ones at the end of the table are all held up by stags, and this is again another reference to the family coat of arms, because the family coat of arms has a pair of stags on either side of it acting as supporters. So there's all sorts of symbolism built into the decoration of the silver.
The women at Chatsworth house parties were also adorned with family heirlooms, and the double duchess would have taken centre stage in the Devonshire tiara.
It was made in London and it comprises 1,900 diamonds in total. The weight of 1,900 diamonds set in silver and gold is quite significant. And the pressure it puts on your neck is something that you actually had to get used to.
This tiara could be worth more than $2 million. The Prince of Wales insisted that the women at Chatsworth house parties wore them.
In fact, she did wear it in this very theatre when she sat in the front row next to King Edward VII when they were watching the theatricals. You can imagine in this theatre, and you've got the theatre lights right in front of her, and you've got the chandelier lights as well, and every gem would have just sparkled.
Chatsworth house parties were glittering spectacles. And one jewel in the firmament was the double duchess's beautiful daughter-in-law, Consuelo Ignaza. She was the first of a number of feisty American females to shake up the aristocrats of Chatsworth. An exotic mix of a New England mother and a flamboyant Cuban father, Consuelo had been raised in Louisiana. Wildly unconventional, she liked to play the banjo and smoke cigars, and at the age of 18, she'd managed to marry an English lord.
Consuelo is a really fascinating character during this period. She's actually one of the early American, what we would call the dollar princesses, the heiresses from the United States who married into the British aristocracy.
Although the Chatsworth estate was still wealthy, changing times meant others were struggling to survive, as income from land was falling. They looked to America to marry a fortune. It was an attractive proposition on both sides.
British aristocracy is considered the best. They're a cut above the Continentals, and they're a cut above because there are fewer of the titles because of this primogeniture. So they are seen as the cream of the crop. A duke who has a really prestigious title and a beautiful property, or a number of properties, he will hold out to get someone who's very wealthy.
When Consuelo Ignaza married the double duchess's son in 1876, it was one of the first weddings between an American heiress and a British aristocrat. But things soon started to go wrong, and within a year, Consuelo's husband had deserted her. But the double Duchess Louise stood by her daughter-in-law, which ensured Consuelo's acceptance in the highest aristocratic circles.
Consuelo does meet the Prince of Wales, who adores American women, and he likes American women because they're peppy, they're vivacious, they're much more fun. They're also, I have to say it, they're fast. Consuelo is, through her affair and her friendship with the Prince of Wales, is almost a marriage broker, where she would introduce young American women into society. She would sort of run them by the Prince of Wales, and if he gave the nod, then they actually could be introduced, and it might be a very profitable way, very easy way for them to make acquaintances for husbands, or indeed to be accepted in society.
Over the coming years, Consuelo introduced many dollar princesses to titled husbands. She became a well-established figure in the double duchess's orbit. Both continued to party at Chatsworth throughout the first decade of the 20th century. But World War I brought an abrupt end to the excesses of the age of house parties. Many aristocratic fortunes had dwindled, but at Chatsworth, thanks to the vast scale of the estate, the Dukes of Devonshire had ridden the storm. But there was an unstoppable force the Cavendish family couldn't control. It came from across the Atlantic. Fred Astaire's sister Adele was his original dancing partner. In 1923, they came to England to star on the London stage. They soon achieved the stardom they already enjoyed back home. and it was Adele who'd put them there.
Adele is actually the one that's the most famous. She completely captivates London society, including royalty.
One of the hearts she captured was that of Charlie Cavendish, second son of the Duke of Devonshire. He brought her to Chatsworth to meet his parents.
She's so overawed, so family history goes, that when she got to the door of the library, the 9th Duke and Duchess were standing by the fireplace halfway down this long room. And she's so overawed, she starts turning cartwheels down the whole length of the library, lands at the 9th Duke's feet, and says hello. That's how they meet.
2 years later, the celebrity couple married in the centuries-old chapel at Chatsworth.
Well, the wedding had to be kept secret because Adele was a really big star. She was in all of the newspaper columns. This whole book is full of newspaper clippings of their wedding, and it's clippings in this country, throughout the whole of the UK and in America as well. It was so unusual at that time for an actress to marry into the English aristocracy. The fact that she's having this fairy tale romance with an English lord just completely captivates everybody. In the end, they marry here at Chatsworth in this very chapel on the 9th of May in 1932. The household staff here were only told the night before the wedding in order to keep it a secret. And that's because they didn't want the newspapers to know, although there is a photograph that actually shows the paparazzi, as we call them today, actually outside Chatsworth.
The marriage lasted until Charlie died, aged just 38, after a long battle with alcoholism. Adele returned to the US, and by that time another tragedy had played out on Chatsworth's stately stage. This time, it was a Kennedy in the spotlight. In the churchyard at Chatsworth, a gravestone marks the end of an ill-fated love story. Kathleen Kennedy was JFK's favorite sister. They shared the same sense of humor and lust for life. Chatsworth's graveyard is her final resting place. Her untimely death marked the end of a decade of emotional turmoil and tragedy. It all started when she met the heir to the Duke of Devonshire in 1938. It was religion that would conspire to bring about the downfall of the star-crossed lovers. At the end of the 1930s, war clouds were brewing over Europe. But the English aristocracy remained confident of their wealth and power. In 1938, Billy Cavendish turned 21, and as heir to the great Devonshire estate and title of Duke, he was England's most eligible bachelor. But that year, an exotic new dynasty arrived on England's shores, the Kennedys.
The British probably hadn't seen much like the Kennedys before, this brash, fun, irreverent group of 9 children and an attractive mother and a noted financier for a father.
Their father had been made ambassador to London.
At the American Embassy in Prince's Gate, Ambassador Joseph Kennedy has been joined by part of his family. Mrs. Kennedy has come from the United States with 5 of their 9 children. If this is an American invasion, it certainly looks a happy one.
His 18-year-old daughter, Kathleen, nicknamed Kick, was an instant hit.
Kathleen and her brothers were a fabulous novelty for the British. They got a particular kick out of Kick because she was probably the most easily social, one of the quickest and brightest of the Kennedys, and also quite rebellious.
In great country houses like Chatsworth, aristocrats were still following time-honored protocols. When Kick entered this elite world, she blew a breath of fresh air through the English upper classes.
So along comes Kick, And she shows up at these parties calling the Duke of, Rutland, Dookie Wookie. She was so sweet and open and funny and fun and unself-conscious that she was, immediately embraced by the British.
Kick came from a rich family, but the wealth of the English aristocracy was something else.
Because she was American, she had never really known explicit class distinctions where people have titles or inheritance of a house like Chatsworth.
Suddenly she recognized that wealth didn't just carry with it stuff. Wealth carried with it a real position and a real difference from other people.
In the whirlwind of aristocratic parties, it wasn't long before Kick caught the eye of Billy Cavendish.
Without a doubt, Billy was the catch of the season because his was probably the most powerful family in terms of the aristocracy. So for Kathleen to win his heart was just a masterstroke.
As the romance developed, Billy took Kick to visit his ancestral home.
When she first came to Chatsworth, I think it would have taken her breath away. This was history embodied in the treasures that were there. And it was also wealth that you couldn't buy.
Kick loved Chatsworth, in part because it was part of Billy's life and his heritage. I don't know that she ever had any particular aspiration to be the Duchess of Devonshire, per se. She was really genuinely in love with Billy.
But there was a problem. Billy was a Protestant English lord, and Kick Kennedy was an Irish-American Catholic.
The Duke of Devonshire's view of the situation was that Billy had been raised to perform his duty to his country and to his family, to his faith, and the possibility that there might be Catholic children who would inherit the title, and Chatsworth didn't fit in very well with that.
And for Kick's father, Joe, who wanted his son to be the first Catholic president of the US, his daughter's choice of husband had political ramifications too. In 1939, war broke out in Europe, and the Kennedys returned to the US. For 5 years, Kick was unable to return to England. Then in 1944, she managed to get a passage. Within weeks, the couple were reunited, and in May 1944, Kick and Billy finally married. A month later, Billy went to fight in a war which was in its final throes in Europe. On the 9th of September, he was shot dead. Even though she'd lost Billy, Kick decided to make her home in England. 3 years later, she had begun to get her life back on track. In May 1948, Kick boarded a plane headed for the south of France. The plane hit an intense thunderstorm and crashed into a mountain, killing all on board. Kick's father was the only family member to attend the funeral, which took place at Chatsworth.
When I was going through family papers, and I found a crumpled envelope, and it had my grandfather's handwriting on it, and it said, to Kick, anyone who ever met her found that their lives were immediately made better.
In 1963, JFK made a trip to Britain. He insisted on making an unexpected diversion to Chatsworth to spend time at his favourite sister's grave. With no planning and no Secret Service preparations in place, the visit was a closely guarded secret. It was 6 months before his own untimely death. In the intervening years, the Devonshires had been facing another problem. Billy's father, the 10th Duke of Devonshire, never recovered from the death of his son and heir. Chatsworth suffered too. Like many large houses, it had been taken over by the state during the war. But even after the war was over, Chatsworth stood empty.
My uncle was killed in the war, and that devastated my grandparents, and they never moved back, or wanted to move back.
Chatsworth only reopened when the current Duke's father inherited. It was the 1950s, and England's post-war government introduced hefty inheritance taxes, which hit the aristocracy hard.
For a fairly short period, there was this huge capital tax. It affected a lot of places. Hundreds, if not thousands, of country houses were blown up between 1945 and 1960. Then my grandfather died in 1950, and my parents were faced with 80% capital tax.
The bill ran in excess of $60 million in today's money. The current Duke's parents were determined not to let Chatsworth go.
It was a very long, gradual progress, sort of mirroring Britain after the war, really, where everything was exhausted, there was very little resources, there was very little spirit. They slowly paid off the tax, and they slowly got Chatsworth going again. That was a long, gradual process of rehabilitation. And we wouldn't be here now if they hadn't worked as hard and as successfully.
By 1980, the debt was finally paid off. Since then, Chatsworth Collection has been restored to its former glory.
Well, it's very exciting because I'm certainly always learning more about the different aspects of the collection, and bits of information appear, we learn more, we get experts to come and look and tell us more, and so whether it's the furniture or the paintings or the minerals, so we're always learning about the things that happen to have finished up here at Chatsworth.
And as Chatsworth goes forward into the 21st century, the current Duke believes that in order to keep Chatsworth alive for the future, he has to rely on the practices of the past.
Well, I think it's a moral issue. I mean, do you decide to leave almost all the wealth of the family, not my wealth, but the wealth of the family, to one person, my son, or divide it between him and his sisters? We've decided to do the old-fashioned thing of leaving it mostly to William and look after the girls a bit. And they've understood that right from the time they were little. So I hope that they don't feel any sort of unfairness, or if they do, they understand the reason for it.
By sticking with England's centuries-old aristocratic traditions, the 12th Duke of Devonshire intends to keep Chatsworth living and breathing for another 500 years. To learn more about this program, visit pbs.org. This episode is available on DVD. To order, visit shoppbs.org or call 1-800-PLAY-PBS. Chatsworth. In the middle of an estate the size of Washington, D.C., sits the home of the Dukes of Devonshire, one of the grandest aristocratic families in England. The stories of this great dynasty are inextricably intertwined with those of the house. Tales of intrigue, tragedy, and scandal.
The country house party is the absolutely perfect time for you to be able to meet with your lovers.
From the decadent life of one shockingly glamorous duchess.
It certainly wasn't a traditional lesbian relationship by any sense.
To the tumultuous love story of JFK's favourite sister.
It would have been a stain on both the Devonshires and also the Kennedys.
These are the secrets of Chatsworth.
Explore new worlds and new ideas through programs like this. Made available for everyone through contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Chatsworth is home to Peregrine Cavendish, the 12th Duke of Devonshire. His family have owned it for almost 500 years. Today, there are just 11 dukes in England, out of a nation of 53 million. And houses like Chatsworth reflect their social standing.
It's very much home, and it's something which is much more of a home than perhaps it looks like from the outside. I think it helps that I'm used to it. It's not nearly as intimidating when you live there as it might look from the outside. Just the luckiest people in the world to be able to look out of our sitting room and see that beautiful view every day, different weathers, different lights. We're very lucky.
Chatsworth is just one of 4 great houses owned by the Duke of Devonshire, but it's certainly the most palatial. With a roof the size of a football field, more than half a mile of passageways, 300 rooms, 17 staircases and 350 doors, Chatsworth is one of England's largest private houses. The Duke of Devonshire enjoys the highest title of the English aristocracy, the hierarchy of noblemen who once ruled the country. Like all aristocrats, for the men of Chatsworth, their power base lay in land.
Land is very important because through land you obviously can create money, both through rents to farmers, but also from produce. Having large holdings of land is what supported these great houses.
For 1,000 years, the kings and queens of England have rewarded faithful subjects with titles and land. And by the 1500s, the aristocratic Cavendish family had established themselves at Chatsworth. Back then, they were merely the Earls of Devonshire. 3 generations later, their title was upgraded to Duke, in thanks for Cavendish support of King William III in 1694.
It was an expression, really, of your position to be raised from an earldom to a dukedom. Being a duke means you have a higher position within the aristocracy and are closer to the monarchy.
People sometimes, when they introduced or they know they're going to meet somebody who's got a title, aren't quite sure what to expect, and then of course they're bound to be disappointed because we're just perfectly normal like they are.
But back in the 17th century, at Chatsworth, the Dukes of Devonshire were part of a power elite, exercising real control over people's lives. To maintain power, they had to keep hold of their wealth through centuries of turmoil. That's what the Duke's family have done for 16 generations, thanks to a medieval tradition that the English aristocracy still use to this day. It's known as primogeniture.
What particularly foreign visitors find hard to understand is primogeniture, in that almost everything, all the chattels and the assets of the family, go to the eldest son. And that has been the English way for many years. It's breaking down for obvious reasons now. It's deeply unfair, but it does mean that the large bulk of a collection will stay in one hand. So if the land is not divided, then there is enough land to generate income to keep the houses going.
As well as being the Duke's home, Chatsworth is also a tourist attraction.